Okay. So for today's profiling call, we started looking through some of our kind of just categorization of some of our outstanding tickets last week. And for the most part, I think we're mostly through what we need for 1.2, but Elliot made the good point last week to say that we actually may have, there's maybe some that it's worth going through and classifying, like, do we think that this has to be fixed by 1.2, 2.0 or later? And then I figured we'd actually take one of the tickets that we have that actually contains a lot of different changes that are necessary for observation for lab result. That's part of the outstanding tickets needing to be applied, and actually just go through it, make the changes on the call, because it is a profiling call, just for the benefit of kind of getting it done and also doing a little bit of show and tell on it. And then depending on kind of where we're sitting after that, talking through whether or not for observation for lab results, we do want to up the maturity, because right now it's sitting at a 0 where general results is sitting at a 1. And then this one I added because it was discussed last time. There's interest, I think, at least from the governance side of things, to take a look at the differences, or so I say, take a look at the relationship between Australia Base and Australia Core, to help kind of inform our thinking towards how we might want to position the baseline to evolve
Happy
moving
Thanksgiving,
forward.
Sheridan.
Hey, Elliot, how are you? Oh, I don't know if you can hear us. Can you hear us now, Elliot? Can everybody else hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I will, if anyone still wants to throw something in the chat for Elliot, just in case his mic isn't working.
It is now.
Okay, it is. Awesome. I was just going through the agenda items. We're just talking about this last piece. And I was thanking you for the Thanksgiving wishes. So this was, I don't know if we'll get to this today. I've got it pulled up if we want to, but it was coming out of the governance session last week where we were talking about wanting to understand how Australia has positioned their base and core together to inform some of the kind of continuing discussion that we're having about, you know, what does the future of the baseline look like as we look to expand potentially additional profiles that are in scope. And then this is kind of just a standing agenda item. So I think we're probably going to use most of the day on these two items, unless I hear that folks want to do, you know, something differently. Was there anything else on the agenda that we want to make sure that we touched on from the profiling perspective that I should bump up and include before we get going? All right. Then kicking it off, just a reminder to folks. So we're shooting for 1.2, which is really targeted around kind of like these kind of breaking change fixes, things that like have had decisions in them for a while but haven't been applied to the profiles. Have that go in before the December break, with a focus of 2.0 being really focused around like large overhaul, canonical URL, any final QA cleanup, potentially some updates to identify the maturity of some of the actual profiles themselves. And in prepping for that, we have really made our way through the majority of items in the issue log that need actual profiling decisions on them. There's effectively 2 that are in the submitted bucket and 12 that have had some discussion on them previously that we've indicated awaiting community feedback, but that might make sense to just review this set of 14 before we, you know, really start to say, okay, yes, this is truly the cutoff for 1.2 versus 2.0 versus something else. So I have it on the agenda today. I think following, well, we can look at a few of them and then go into the observation lab result one. But the good news is that, you know, all of the ones that were kind of immediately pressing are now sitting at the status of kind of ready to be applied. And I've got a page kind of summarizing some of them. So this is the one I've got for working on today. But really any one of these, I think, has what is necessary within the ticket to kind of understand and make the change independently for our volunteers. But I did want to pull up the issue log real quick so we can take a look at it together and actually look at the set of issues that are some of them are classified as submitted, which means we haven't talked about them at all. And then I've got the consideration ones, which I was kind of broadly grouping together as like terminology driven. There's one in here that actually we should probably look at both, that we might want to talk about whether or not there's a decision that's necessary for 1.2. So I'm going to pull up this birth sex one, which I thought was kind of interesting from a profiling perspective, because we basically said 12 months ago, yeah, we've had this birth sex in here from the US Corps for a while. But we also know that since it was originally introduced into Corps, US Corps 4 years ago, there's been like a lot of work that's happened. And we're still hosting it in our patient profile. So I thought it would be a good one to start by basically saying, is this one that we want to say this is a 1.2 issue to review and address, or if this is more 2.0 based on what we're trying to target for both of those. So I'll show you the patient profile really quickly just to give you a sense. Oops. Let me actually get this way. Okay, so we've got the patient profile. Right now it's got Aboriginal identity group, Aboriginal identity indicator. These were two that were added in that weren't part of US Corps. And then birth sex and ethnicity, which were both modeled after the US Corps extensions at the time. And really haven't had any updates since. What I thought was interesting about this was that, you know, obviously we've had some evolution in how our guides are now like using some of the sex and gender harmony extensions. We've seen recorded sex or gender come up in a number of guides. We've seen things like gender identity. And while we can look to like what AU base is doing and seeing like they're including recorded sex or gender, but not birth sex, US Corps is still socializing birth sex. And I don't know if that changes our thoughts on whether or not this is something that like maybe we'll take a little bit more time to like draw a line in the sand about. But I wanted to just flag it because I think it reiterates the fact that like, yeah, we actually probably do have to make a decision about some of the choices that we've made and just decide whether that's like a 1.2 or 2.0 decision. So the things that were originally requested as part of our review was evaluate the value set, evaluate whether must support should be removed on the actual extension, like within it. And then I think we were talking about coding versus something else for it. So this is the actual extension itself. So you can see like you've got this like URL that has this must support in it and the value coding, which has this must support in it, which I mean, previously we've gone through and like relaxed must supports on some of these items that are, you know, ultimately, if you're utilizing the extension, it's obvious that you're going to be populating values in the extension. So I see in the chat, Shannon, you said CACDI will have sex at birth as well. So like are you expecting CACDI to have sex at birth like in the near term? Because that would maybe inform whether or not we wait to make a change in 1.2 versus 2.0 versus waiting.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. TBD.
Okay.
The soonest it would be is version 2, which would be next September.
Sex at birth.
We're just kind of doing that scoping now. But CHIR is releasing our pan-Canadian sex and gender standards, which are based on the BC standards. I see Mukesh on the line too, this spring. So if that gets sort of scoped into the next version of the CACDI, it would be September. But the goal is to get it in there eventually.
It's true.
So does that change folks' opinions about like, should we wait and basically say, we're gonna keep it as it is and then do like a full overhaul after? Or is it something that we should target for 2.0 as something that like is a discussion item? If our goal for 2.0 is gonna be like the spring.
Sheridan, did this, sorry, apologies, I'm playing a little bit of catch up, but did this ticket or kind of issue come just as a like harmonization with US cores that?
It
or did
came up
something like that?
about a year ago. I actually think, I don't know if Thomas is on the call. It was one of the things that when we were reviewing, I think like another extension for data type correctness on coding. Someone on the call had basically said, yeah, we were looking at birth sex and trying to make this determination of like, was the data type that we utilized correct? And they had said, well, it's probably more important to review overall like relatedness and applicability of this extension entirely. And so I flagged it from a call, but again, it's pretty old.
Yeah,
Maybe probably it is from when we were working on GSSO in the BC at that time. Maybe I don't know if Lorraine or someone might have said at that time because it's still evolving. And as Shannon gave an update that where we're going as pan Canadians, so that could be the reason at that time.
So as it stands, the risk of these two items, URL and value and data type, is relatively low. Like if those remain as they are for a year, particularly this is more of a consistency issue. This is as long as we're still expecting the expression of this to be codified is less impactful. I think this probably is the most impactful thing if we decide, hey, we're not going to touch this for like another year. We're going to even flag it post 2.0. If it's dramatically different than what's in recorded or what's in the section gender harmony. So right now, it's something that's like a pointer, but it also is an example strength. So that means that like from a profiling perspective, we aren't telling people, hey, this is what's preferred. So that limits some of our impact as well. In the sense where I think we were just pulling from what was in US core at the time for administrative sex. With that in mind, like, is there any concern that we have of this making its way into 2.0 without the changes, knowing that it's pretty relaxed to begin with? If the answer is yes, what I will do is I'll categorize the issue rather than submit it. I'll indicate this is for community feedback and changes will be reevaluated like once we have something following the publication of 2.0. What do folks think?
that sounds reasonable to me.
Anyone think that's unreasonable? Okay, so the the need to review in 1.2 or 2.0. So Current profiling. Binding strength is currently an example. Even if the Is that fair? The like, basically like our binding strength being set as an example limits like someone's interpretation that I have to build my system this way. And the value don't necessarily impact instance information. And we anticipate that coding will be desired. So current may not be Is this fair? Anything that people would change about this?
Looks fair at this point.
Signing ticket for review following 2.0. Okay. Okay, and then the last one that I think that we have that's still in the submitted category is, this was one that we were modifying the observation and observation results. We were like talking through changes to those. And there was confusion because the like the way that we were applying the constraints were very much focused on lab scenarios and lab workflows, but the actual kind of definition and then like the naming convention that just says results might have created a lack of clarity for folks. And so the goal was to log a ticket and ideally make a determination of whether or not we thought the description and or the name needed to change to be more in line with the intent of the profile being very laboratory focused. Do folks think that that's something that needs to immediately change? You guys were the ones that brought it up, so everyone's really quiet today. But we got to do something, even if
We
it's
don't have
pushing it
a,
off. What's that?
don't have an excuse for a turkey coma.
I was
Yeah, right.
thinking the same, Elliot. I wish I did.
So I think the resource is fairly specific to labs. The question is, even if it's poorly named, are we restricting ourselves to only using it?
Hmm.
Can you
Can-
expand on that?
Pardon me?
Can you expand on what you mean, restricting ourselves to only using it?
Right. So could you do a non-diagnostic report profile diagnostic report? And do we still have, like, are there other resources that reference diagnostic report profile that says this is the only kind of diagnostic report that you can do and
Ah.
still be compliant?
Got it. So if I go to the baseline, I'm gonna look at this because it's easier finding that.
Yeah,
So if we have diagnostic report here, we can see the places that reference it. So immunization, medication administration, medication statement, procedure, service request.
so if
So
you go to procedure.
yeah.
And look for diagnostic report.
I think it's this. Yep.
Do we have condition, observation, procedure? So you cannot do a compliant procedure and point to a non-profile diagnostic report.
Because we don't have like the that as another, like the base resource as an option.
Right. So that's the challenge.
It's interesting because we also have, I mean, yeah, this one is just the base resource. So some of them do still include the like the base resource for these. So the risk of, so you're actually saying the challenge is more upstream in the fact that like we have made this decision that it's very laboratory focused to date, but that ultimately the places that reference it may actually want to be able to reference it, diagnostic reports or observations that are non-lab specific.
Yes.
And when we look at this, so it's not necessarily a decision to like clarify the description. We also have the option of ensuring that this is more generic results oriented as well, or adding additional targets that would allow for the regular diagnostic report based resource to be utilized.
Right.
Do folks have, so just in line, like outlining these, like what we know is a lot of the decisions that we've made clearly here are very lab oriented. If we choose to continue kind of this lab orientation, we would in the probably the simplifier description, make it even more clear, because it's, I think it's more clear in the guide, but less clear, I think, in the simplifier page, that this is only lab results, and ensure that the places that reference this profile that we want to allow diagnostic report to be used in workflows outside of lab have this expanded reference target. And I don't know if the decision is going to be the same across the board for each of these. Are folks more in favor of keeping the purity of this, like, hey, we've made the decisions that are lab oriented, keep it lab oriented, or trying to make this much more generic? I think that making it more generic will be a longer effort, because we'll have to evaluate a lot of the like what does a is effective as meaningful in non-lab workflows for diagnostic report. How is diagnostic report used outside of labs? Let's look at the
Imaging.
okay. lab, pathology, imaging.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the questions that I had when I first looked at the baseline was, why is there a specific profile for diagnostic labs and not for imaging?
Because that's where US core came from.
Yeah. And I mean, it's where the work has been done at this point, right?
Yeah, let's take a look if they've changed. So they have the report and note. Would imaging be more like report and note? Because we do also have report and note. Yeah, okay. So I think it's like the framework that the US core utilized that I think we've also inherited is there is a set of rules if your diagnostic report is supposed to cover lab, and then for the other
Everything
scenario,
else.
you're
Yeah.
going to use the other one. But where is it? Oh, it's down here because for maybe it's missing from the XML. Okay. So yeah, we have the same, if then imaging is similarly scoped into our report and note, as well as it would be diagnostic. Sorry, hold on. Let me see, score one. Yeah, as well as like cardiology ones. Does that mean that then we would only have to get full coverage of both scenarios, we would just have to expand our target references to include results reporting and report and note? Because at least according to the FHIR standard, like these are the 4 kinds of diagnostic reports, which are covered by our 2 distinct profiles.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm kind of keen to just making that more clear and then fixing the challenge that we have with places that are referenced where we've probably unintentionally excluded report and or the note one. What do others think? Or is there value to keeping this slimmed? Let's take the procedure one, for example, keeping reason reference only applicable for labs and not cardiology or imaging, which it's hard to imagine, but.
I can't see a reason that we would intentionally want to keep it narrowed unless we had a plan to do a whole parallel. This is an imaging procedure. This is and then limit the references to the specific type of report that would come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think, on the other hand, widening it, particularly unless you say it's this type of report or this type of report, widening it to say it's the lab report or any kind of report, takes away any strength of that lab profiling.
Mm-hmm. So there is value then, to trying to say, hey, there's a pattern that we have of constraints within lab, that are meaningful to maintain.
Yeah.
So value to however, in discussing our options, we identified a problem where many of the, and we'll just validate this real quick, profiles that target DR for lab results do not include an option, the ability to also reference the all right, let's validate that that is actually true. So we saw it true here. Let's see where else. So immunization. Yep, immunization performer reason reference. It's also that way. It looks to also be this way for a reason reference for that. Let's see. Okay. Yep. Okay. All right. So in all these places, the reason reference is slim to just this. Let's take a look at the profile for report and note. Who uses that? Yep, it's not actually referenced. Okay. So I'll update this to say all. So like in addition to like clarifying that the title to be So if we were going to double down, we would have to make this change as well. Is this one that we want to make? Like, do we want to formally make this change, this correction, both to the title and to the reference targets?
I think so.
Is there anyone that wants to motion for it? I don't think I can motion for it as the person that's chairing the meeting.
Sure, I will then.
Okay. Does anyone want a second? Oh, actually, Ellie, I've got this written. Do you want me to modify this or rewrite or motion this in a particular way?
Just remove the "we would need to."
Okay. Any other modifications you'd put to this? I can also call out, let me see, I think it was like procedure. Medication administration, medication statement. Procedure. And med admin, med stat, procedure service request. Okay. All right. Now they're actually referenced about. Any updates to this before we call for a seconder?
No.
Does anyone want a second?
Yeah, I'll second this, Spears.
Okay. All right, do we need any further discussion? All right, does anyone want to abstain from a vote to carry out this motion? Does anyone want to vote negative towards this motion? All right, it's 10-0-0. All right, I think this is probably one that we want to apply in 1.2. Given that it is a like a technical constraint that is unintended and potentially would be problematic for implementers today. Are there feelings about people wanting to wait in deploying that into 2.0 instead? All right, I'll mark it as ready to be applied. Okay, so that really then just brings us to everything that is remaining in our issue log for kind of what is outstanding that we know of, we've heard about, but that we don't think necessarily like it's a 1.2 issue. Are there any of these that we want to look at today that we think that that might not be the case, where it sounds like this might be something that we want to ensure makes its way into 1.2, or we want to kickstart the conversation about whether or not it should be in 2.0? This was one that I wasn't totally sure if we could, this was actual, still an issue, or if it would be something that would be like a breaking issue. It didn't come up in any of the like recent QA activities. But, this kind of versioning that was on verification status, I think it was raised a number of years ago. We went back, we thought it was fixed. Has anybody else been having this issue? Where specifically like the application of the version on the value set was causing some evaluation of slices to be incorrectly, or I should say, was causing the utilization of the values from this value set in examples to be evaluated incorrectly against the slice.
Really?
I mean, I think at some point in time it was an issue. I don't know if it's an issue anymore. So we kind of kept it in the backlog just in case, like to say, hey, we experienced this once, but we think it was resolved. But just in case it happened to anyone else, this was like the place that we kind of kept it top of mind. But I don't actually, I think this is kind of there's been quite a lot of work, obviously, that's been done in the terminology validation space since this. And I don't think it's a current issue with our QA log, but we'll look. We don't have a ton of examples to like throw up against it, but let's see.
Boy, there's a lot of errors there.
Yeah, I think most of these are the working group ones, but let's see. Yeah, HL7.
Oh, and those will all go away when we no longer use the HL7 canonical.
And some of these are specifically, we've already gotten action items on for diagnostic report, and they're just waiting on the application. This one is going to be, we talked about this last week, that one's going to be removed. Oh, this one is interesting, actually. This has been coming up as of like the last month, but that's a warning. The one that I think what's happening here? It's interesting. Let's take a look at allergy first. Because that was the place where the value set was occurring. Value set, allergy intolerance verification. Too many tabs open. Okay, this was a suppress warning that we put in, which is maybe why we're not seeing it. But it's not come up.
Set reference.
We may not even have, let me take a look at the actual allergy intolerance medication, or let's see. It may not be an issue anymore because I'm not even sure we have a binding. I remember one of the things that came up recently as a change for allergy was to remove some of, like, we had verification status, we had a slice on it, and we ended up removing it. So it may not even be relevant anymore. Yeah, we're not even putting a binding to it anymore. So the issue that was originally brought up was we had bound to a value set, and that value set we had also included and appended the version of that value set there. But one reason we may not be seeing it in the QA anymore is explicitly because we've removed the binding that we had on this. Is that enough to like close this out?
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
Okay. So closed, no change. Cool. Which I think leaves us then with this one that we just talked about. Actually, I'm wondering if maybe because we said we're gonna wait. I think it's probably closed future consideration, right?
Yeah,
And then when we go into following 2.0, we'll look at the things that are closed future consideration. They'll stay in that bucket. Okay, which leaves us with role terminology, Aboriginal. This was one where it was like, fixed codes, I guess, in this value set. Yeah. From DAR. Shannon, is Aboriginal, which one? Identity group in CACDI?
It is, yeah. Indigenous identity, but yes.
Okay. Which kind of, I guess, if something is scoped and we're seeing it currently evolve, I think that merits a decision about whether or not, from a baseline perspective, we should try to like harmonize now or wait to harmonize until the final version comes out following like the CACDI 1 and CA Core 1. We could either try to preliminarily harmonize now, or target it as something that would be like 2.0 and part of the harmonization efforts that would occur in 2.0 if it was applicable.
Yeah, it's a good question. In case it's helpful, the plan is to release the final version 1 of the CACDI in March.
Okay.
The open review closes today. So I would be surprised if anything changes with regards to Indigenous identities specifically. If anything, we're just going to continue to build that out further, but it will be final, quote unquote, always evolving, but final version 1 in March.
So important to broader harmonization.
And we're hoping that that becomes like a regular release cycle as well. So that could help. I mean, I'm thinking if you folks have that kind of built into your like review cycle as well.
Yeah, I think knowing like the dates is also helpful for us for planning 2.0. Like we know, like we knew it would take some time just in the spring, just generally to get a lot of the effort in. But if it was like, hey, we'll see something solidified by then that will allow for us to accomplish some harmonization efforts before we put out 2.0, that might allow for us to say, oh, well, maybe we'll target April for the 2.0 release of baseline or whatever that ends up being.
For sure, that makes perfect sense.
I'll just mark it as like something to discuss with governance. Because we haven't really had a chance to, like we've been saying, largely we know what we want to do for 1.2, but we haven't had any kind of external targets for 2.0 other than sometime in the spring once we get through 1.2. I can keep this one as awaiting community feedback. If they're like, as long as we have a text that says, hey, we think this is probably a 2.0-er, unless folks think that we should categorize this differently. I don't really think we have a better one for right now. Okay. It does make me think that like, when we developed the original, like the custom statuses, we had always said, oh, it'll be like closed and have the versions appended there, but we never thought about like ready to be applied and assigning like substates for ready to be applied, but it's taken us this long to actually need them, so I suppose it's not that big of a deal. All right, I'm gonna go, we've got a few more minutes. Is there anything else that we want to take a look at that we think, hey, that might stand out as something we want for 1.2 or 2.0? The other one I was gonna, I think this is one. That might be related to what we just talked about, practical examples. Okay, so it's not quite exactly what we were talking about earlier with diagnostic report. I don't know if this one's immediately actionable. It can maybe, my recommendation would be like, especially if this sounds like something that you had brought up on a call, take a look at these and see if there's any that like you immediately want to see prioritized, because while I enter them, they are just the items that people bring up on calls from time to time, or community feedback that we receive. So if you do want to see your item prioritized for 1.2 or 2.0, let us know. And that like that'll probably be one of the last activities at the next profiling call as well, is just to like go through any last standing ones, because the goal would be to get a package out before like in the first 2 weeks of December, basically. All right. I don't think, I'm just gonna go back to my deck real quick. There's some things that are going to be in observation lab results that I might pre-apply before our next call, but I think this should be probably the focus of our next profiling call, is just like trying to get some of these in. So if other folks who are volunteers want to focus on these, I think we'll probably target our profiling calls on these two things, because they are the tickets that have like the most action items to end up applying. So that makes sense to others. We'll move forward with that approach. Anything else that folks want to discuss? We've got 2 minutes left, but ultimately I think it's probably too early to dive into any of these. And it sounds like people didn't have much more of these other tickets that they needed to look at before we prepare for packaging. If not, I will let you guys have a minute or two back of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Anil,
Yes.
Ken Sheridan. Can you hold for
Yeah.
a sec?
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
Bye, guys.